Think about it. In just a few short decades, China completely transformed itself from a struggling agrarian society into an absolute titan of the global economy. Today, it is the world's undisputed manufacturing powerhouse. So let's dive right into this explainer and uncover exactly how China engineered this incredible economic miracle, the massive structural headwinds threatening its momentum today, and the incredibly high-stakes pivot Beijing is executing right now to secure its future.
To really grasp the mind-bending scale of this story, we have to start with one staggering number: 800 million. That is how many people have been lifted out of extreme poverty in China since 1978. I mean, the extreme poverty rate plummeted from over 88% in 1981 to practically zero today. We are looking at a scale of wealth creation that is quite literally unprecedented in modern human history.
But look, this wasn't just some happy accident of free markets. A famous 1992 quote from Deng Xiaoping perfectly captures their deliberate long-game strategy. He said, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." They didn't just want to passively participate in the global economy. They mapped out strategic choke points decades in advance so they could eventually dominate global supply chains.
All right, Chapter 1, Rise of a Superpower. Let's trace exactly how this dragon ascended from the factory floor to the global giant we know today. Following massive economic reforms in 1978, China kicked off an aggressive marketization process. By 1990, they actually reopened stock markets to force state-owned enterprises to deal with real market discipline. Then came the absolute watershed moment, 2001, their entry into the World Trade Organization. Fast forward less than a decade, they became the world's largest exporter, skyrocketing straight into the $19.6 trillion economic behemoth standing before us today. You know, we constantly hear people talk about China's rise, but honestly, it's way more accurate to call it a return. Back in 1820, right at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, China actually accounted for a massive 33% of global GDP. After a century of decline, it has surged right back, doubling its share from 8.5% in 2010 to 17% today. They are systematically reclaiming the massive slice of the global economic pie they used to own. So how on earth did they finance this explosive growth? The secret sauce was internal capital, driven by a really unique demographic window where the working-age population vastly outnumbered dependents. Their domestic savings rate just absolutely skyrocketed from 1980 through the mid-2000s. This created an immense pool of capital, and the state-directed banking system funneled all of that cash directly into building out unprecedented infrastructure and industrial megaprojects.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the world's factory. Let's look at how they completely mastered global supply chains.
Here's the thing. China didn't just build a bunch of factories to turn out cheap toys. They engineered an absolute web of global supply chain choke points. Today, they are the world's sole manufacturing superpower. Their industrial output exceeds the next 9 largest manufacturers combined. We're talking about controlling 80% of the world's EV batteries, 85% of solar panels, and even 80% of the active ingredients in generic global pharmaceuticals. The smartphone in your pocket and the medicine in your cabinet both heavily rely on their industrial base.
And this dominance, it's rapidly evolving. They're aggressively shifting their export dependency away from those traditional low-wage sectors like basic clothing and footwear. Instead, they are doubling down on advanced exports. High-tech manufacturing, robotics, and green tech exports recently surged by over 13%. So yeah, they aren't just making the world's sneakers anymore. They are building the world's most advanced technology.
But the story isn't just one of relentless, uninterrupted growth. Let's get into Chapter 3, Navigating Economic Headwinds, because Beijing is facing some massive structural fault lines right now. The single most pressing challenge they face is a fundamental demographic reality. That massive population dividend that fueled their early boom, it's closing. Fast. An aging population and sharply declining birth rates threaten to drastically shrink the labor supply and completely alter consumer demand. The dependency ratio, meaning the number of retirees relying on the working-age population, is climbing steadily, and it's a huge cause for concern. Compounding this demographic time bomb is a brutal cocktail of domestic risks. Most notably, we're witnessing the deliberate, incredibly painful deflation of their massive real estate bubble. This slump has left local governments sitting on an estimated $9 trillion in off-the-books debt. Add in rising youth unemployment plus something called involution, which basically means destructive domestic price wars caused by having way too much industrial capacity, and you can quickly see why the IMF expects China's GDP growth to cool down to 4.4% by 2026.
Faced with these severe economic headwinds, leadership definitely isn't just sitting still. Chapter 4, the Technology Innovation Pivot. They are attempting to engineer a high-tech future.
If you remember exactly one term from this entire explainer, please make it this one: new quality productive forces. This is the absolute beating heart of Beijing's new economic blueprint. It marks a massive, fundamental shift away from the old playbook of just pouring concrete and building endless apartment blocks. Now, they are pivoting to an innovation-led model driven by hard scientific breakthroughs and total technological self-sufficiency. So, what's the playbook to expand the economic pie? Well, step 1 is deliberately starving that bloated property sector of capital. Step 2, redirect those funds straight into frontier technologies. We're talking quantum computing, 6G, and biotech. Step 3, they have a mandated goal to integrate artificial intelligence into 90% of all manufacturing by 2030. And finally, step 4, perhaps the most critical, racing to achieve 80% domestic semiconductor self-sufficiency to bulletproof themselves against foreign export controls.
And guess what? This pivot is already taking hold. Thanks to a massive flood of state investment, shipments of domestic computing chips are actually expected to at least double in 2026. We are currently seeing triple-digit growth in critical sectors like optical fiber and electronic materials. Domestic substitution is rapidly taking over their entire tech supply chain from the ground up. Of course, this aggressive drive for complete tech independence doesn't happen in a vacuum. Chapter 5, The Global Economic Battlefield. Welcome to the superpower tech race with the United States. When you put these two superpowers side by side, their divergent economic strategies are pretty striking. China is aggressively outpacing the US in its gross investment share of GDP. They are basically plowing way more of their economic output directly back into hard infrastructure and factories. Meanwhile, on the human capital front, China is churning out vastly more STEM graduates and engineers, actively building the intellectual army they need to dominate the tech industries of the 2020s and beyond.
And when we look at the artificial intelligence race, it is absolutely fascinating because these two economic titans are playing two totally different games. The American AI focus is heavily software-driven. Think giant foundational models, chatbots, and the massive race to artificial general intelligence. China, on the other hand, is relentlessly focused on physical AI. They are embedding AI directly into hardware, robotics, and automated supply chains to cement their status as the factory of the future.
Now, as their overall macroeconomic growth slides from around 5% down to a projected 4% by 2027, China desperately needs a buffer against rising Western trade barriers and tariffs. To build that safety net, they're leaning heavily into the Belt and Road Initiative. Believe it or not, trade with these non-Western partner economies now makes up over half of China's total goods trade. They are actively diversifying their customer base to protect their massive manufacturing engine.
So we've covered the breathtaking rise from poverty, the severe structural headwinds threatening the economy, and the massive high-stakes pivot toward new quality productive forces. As the ultimate economic battlefield shifts away from simple factory floors and moves into the realms of quantum computing and physical AI, it leaves us with the defining question of our era: who will ultimately dominate the 21st century global economy? Keep a very close eye on these indicators, because whatever happens next is going to completely